If you remember staying up until midnight to watch Aqua Teen Hunger Force, Robot Chicken, or the Boondocks, you experienced something that no longer exists. Television that was genuinely dangerous, unpredictable, and completely unafraid to offend anyone. Adult Swim used to be the last frontier of creative freedom on television, a place where artists could create content so weird, subversive, and experimental that it couldn't exist anywhere else. Now it's a shadow of its former self, producing safe, sanitized content that would have been rejected during its golden age for being too boring and conventional. From 2001 to 2012, Adult Swim wasn't just a programming block. It was a cultural revolution that proved there was an audience for intelligent, subversive, and genuinely artistic animation that treated viewers like adults capable of understanding complex humor, social commentary, and experimental storytelling techniques. But here's what most people don't realize. Adult Swim's decline wasn't caused by changing audience tastes, cord cutting, or increased competition from streaming services. During the same period that Adult Swim was losing its edge, other platforms were proving that there was still a massive appetite for weird, experimental content. Netflix began investing in adult animation. YouTube creators were building audiences with subversive comedy. Even traditional networks started taking more creative risks. So what exactly happened to Adult Swim? How did the most fearless and innovative programming block in television history become a cautionary tale about corporate interference destroying artistic vision? Why did the network that once gave us Metalocalypse, The Venture Brothers, and Tim and Eric Awesome Show become afraid of the very creativity and controversy that had made them legendary? The answer isn't what you think, because what killed Adult Swim wasn't just about television or animation at all. It was about three systematic corporate decisions that nobody saw coming, and they would transform not just how Adult Swim operated, but how an entire generation of late-night viewers would lose access to the kind of genuinely subversive entertainment that had once thrived in television's creative underground. But before we understand what went wrong, we need to understand just how revolutionary and irreplaceable Adult Swim was during its golden age. To understand the downfall of Adult Swim, we need to go back to 2001, when the programming block wasn't just showing cartoons for adults. It was creating a new form of television that celebrated the weird, the experimental, and the genuinely subversive in ways that had never been attempted on mainstream television. Adult Swim in the early 2000s was unlike anything that had ever existed on television. Aqua Teen Hunger Force was a surreal comedy about anthropomorphic fast food that made no logical sense but somehow captured the absurdity of modern life. The Boondocks was a fearless examination of race, politics, and social issues that other networks wouldn't dare touch. Metalocalypse was a brutal satire of celebrity culture disguised as a cartoon about a death metal band. These weren't just cartoons for adults. They were proof that animation could be a legitimate medium for sophisticated social commentary, experimental storytelling, and genuinely subversive art. I remember discovering Adult Swim in college and feeling like I had found something secret and forbidden. Here was television that assumed its audience was intelligent, culturally aware, and capable of appreciating humor that was complex, dark, and sometimes genuinely uncomfortable. But what made Adult Swim's golden age so special wasn't just the individual shows, it was the creative culture that produced them. Adult Swim operated on a revolutionary principle for television: give talented artists complete creative freedom, minimal budget constraints, and the understanding that not everything had to appeal to everyone. If a show was genuinely creative and found its audience, that was enough. This approach produced shows that were wildly different from each other, but united by their commitment to pushing boundaries, challenging conventions, and treating late-night television as a space for genuine artistic experimentation. And it worked. Adult Swim became a cultural phenomenon that influenced comedy, animation, and popular culture in ways that most television could never achieve. But then something changed. And that change began with Adult Swim's first systematic decision: prioritizing advertiser-friendly content over creative freedom. The turning point came around 2010 when Turner Broadcasting, Adult Swim's parent company, began pressuring the network to create content that would be more appealing to mainstream advertisers and less likely to generate controversy or complaints. This marked the beginning of what I call the Great Sanitization, a systematic effort to make Adult Swim programming safer, more predictable, and less likely to offend anyone who might complain to advertisers or regulatory bodies. Shows that had built their reputation on being provocative, controversial, and genuinely subversive were suddenly subjected to content reviews and editorial oversight that had never existed during Adult Swim's golden age. The most heartbreaking example of this shift was what happened to the Boondocks. Aaron Magruder's brilliant social commentary was increasingly censored and watered down until Magruder himself left the show rather than compromise his artistic vision. This revealed the fundamental change in how Adult Swim viewed its programming, not as art or social commentary, but as content that needed to be managed and controlled to avoid corporate liability. But Adult Swim's second systematic decision was even more devastating. They decided to replace expensive, creator-driven animation with cheap, quickly produced live-action programming. Around 2012, Adult Swim executives made a decision that revealed just how far they had strayed from their original mission. They decided that live-action comedy shows were cheaper to produce and easier to control than animated content that required talented creators and long production timelines. This led to an explosion of low-budget live-action shows that felt more like public access television than the sophisticated, artistically ambitious programming that had defined Adult Swim's reputation. Shows like Check It Out with Dr. Steve Brule and various Tim and Eric projects, while having their fans, lacked the visual creativity, production value, and broad appeal that had made Adult Swim's animated content so special. And here's what made this shift so tragic. It eliminated the very thing that had made Adult Swim unique: the willingness to invest in expensive, time-intensive animated content that couldn't exist anywhere else on television. Live-action comedy was something that could be produced by anyone with a camera and a small budget, but the kind of sophisticated, experimental animation that had defined Adult Swim required real investment, talented artists, and a commitment to creative excellence that was becoming increasingly rare in corporate television. But Adult Swim's third and most systematic decision was the one that completed their transformation from a creative sanctuary into a corporate content factory. They decided to prioritize quantity over quality and began flooding their schedule with cheap, disposable programming. The final nail in Adult Swim's coffin came when the network began treating their programming block like a content mill that needed to be filled with as much material as possible, regardless of quality or artistic merit. Instead of carefully curating a small number of high-quality shows that represented the best of what adult animation could achieve, Adult Swim began producing dozens of forgettable programs that felt rushed, underdeveloped, and completely lacking in the creative vision that had once defined the network. This approach produced a schedule that felt cluttered and unfocused, where genuinely creative shows were buried among hours of filler content that existed only to meet programming quotas. And here's what made this shift so devastating. It represented the complete abandonment of everything Adult Swim had once stood for in late-night television. The network that had once been a carefully curated showcase for the best and weirdest animation was now a dumping ground for whatever content could be produced quickly and cheaply enough to fill airtime. The network that had once celebrated artistic risk-taking and creative experimentation was now producing content that was safe, predictable, and completely forgettable. But perhaps the most damaging aspect of Adult Swim's decline was how it affected the entire landscape of adult animation and late-night television. When Adult Swim, the most prestigious and influential platform for adult animation, began treating animated content as disposable filler rather than legitimate art, it sent a message to the entire industry that there was no longer a place for sophisticated, experimental animation on television. Talented animators and creators who had once dreamed of working for Adult Swim began looking elsewhere for opportunities to create meaningful work. Some went to streaming services, others to web platforms, and many simply left television animation entirely. And here's what makes Adult Swim's decline so frustrating. It was completely unnecessary and ultimately self-destructive. The success of shows like Rick and Morty proved that there was still a massive audience for intelligent, creative adult animation that pushed boundaries and challenged conventions. But instead of using this success as a model for revitalizing their entire programming block, Adult Swim treated it as an anomaly while continuing to fill their schedule with cheap, forgettable content. Adult Swim had every advantage: the most respected brand in adult animation, a loyal cult following, access to the world's best animation talent, and a late-night time slot that allowed for complete creative freedom. But they threw it all away in pursuit of cost savings and corporate efficiency. The most tragic part of Adult Swim's decline is that it didn't have to happen. The network could have maintained their commitment to creative excellence while still adapting to changing industry conditions and corporate pressures. They could have supported both experimental animation and live-action programming. They could have treated their late-night time slot as a valuable creative laboratory rather than a dumping ground for cheap content. They could have continued to push the boundaries of what adult animation could achieve while still meeting corporate financial expectations. But instead, they chose the path of least creative resistance, formulaic programming, cost-cutting measures, and the systematic elimination of everything that had made Adult Swim special in the first place. Looking back now, Adult Swim's decline represents more than just the fall of one programming block. It represents the death of television's last creative frontier, the place where genuinely subversive and experimental content could thrive without corporate interference or mainstream approval. The creators who worked during Adult Swim's golden age produced some of the most innovative, culturally significant, and artistically ambitious animation in television history. They proved that there was an audience for intelligent, challenging content that treated viewers like adults, capable of appreciating sophisticated humor and social commentary. But the executives who presided over Adult Swim's decline taught an entire generation of late-night viewers that corporate efficiency was more important than creative excellence, that safe content was more valuable than subversive art, and that the best entertainment was the kind that required the least investment and took the fewest risks. And that's the real tragedy of Adult Swim's decline. It's not just about the loss of good late-night television. It's about the loss of television's last space for genuinely subversive, experimental, and artistically ambitious content that couldn't exist anywhere else. Sure, there are still good adult animated shows being made, just not on Adult Swim. The creative energy that once defined late-night television has moved to streaming services, web platforms, and independent creators who still believe that animation can be a legitimate medium for sophisticated adult entertainment. But for those of us who remember what Adult Swim used to be, the programming block will always represent what we lost. Television's last creative sanctuary, where artists could create genuinely subversive content that challenged conventions, pushed boundaries, and treated late-night viewers like intelligent adults deserving of sophisticated entertainment. The decline of Adult Swim is the story of what happens when corporate executives stop caring about artistic legacy and start caring only about cost efficiency and risk management. It's a cautionary tale about the importance of protecting creative freedom from corporate sanitization, and a reminder that the best entertainment, especially late-night entertainment, comes from artists who are given the freedom to be genuinely dangerous and unpredictable. And honestly, in a world where most entertainment is focus grouped, sanitized, and designed to offend no one, maybe we need to remember what Adult Swim used to represent. The radical idea that late-night television could be a space for genuine artistic experimentation, social commentary, and the kind of subversive content that couldn't exist anywhere else. What was your favorite Adult Swim show from the golden age? Did you stay up late to catch the weird, experimental stuff that you couldn't find anywhere else? Share your late-night Adult Swim memories in the comments. I'd love to hear about the shows that made you feel like you were part of something genuinely subversive and special. If this brought back memories of what late-night television used to offer, please subscribe to the channel and check out the videos on your screen. There's so much more nostalgic media history to explore together.